Volodymyr Kulyk. Volodymyr today will be giving a talk entitled One War, Two Displacements, Language, Practices, and Attitudes of Ukrainian IDPs and Refugees. But right before we get to our talk, I wanted to ask Yuri, do we have the official time for the next movie event?
The 12th of November.
12th of November.
And it's going to be jointly with the School of Journalism and Frontline PBS, and we are screening several journals here in Petersburg and America with him in attendance. So it's going to be a very special event and a panel discussion after the screening of the film.
Wonderful, yeah. So please come to that wonderful event on November 12th, and it will be at the journalism school.
Yes. And we'll be announcing it.
Yes, we'll be circulating the city. So, but today's event, like I mentioned, is Volodymyr Kulyk. Volodymyr Kulyk is professor at the Kyiv School of Economics. Until 2024, he worked for many years at the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies for the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. He has also taught, like I mentioned, at Columbia, but also Stanford and Yale University's Kyiv Mohila Academy and Ukrainian Catholic University, as well as having research fellowship at Harvard, Stanford, Woodrow Wilson Center, University College London, the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, and other Western scholarly institutions. His research fields include the politics of language, memory, and identity, as well as political and media discourse in contemporary Ukraine, on which he has widely published in Ukrainian and Western journals and collected volumes. Professor Kulyk is the author of 4 books, the latest of which is Мовна політика в багатомовних країнах, Закордонний досвід та його придатність для України. In English, it's Language Policies in Multilingual Countries, Foreign Experience and its Relevance to Ukraine. And that volume was published by Duk and Litera, a very prestigious publishing house in Kyiv, in 2021. Currently, Volodymyr Kulyk is a visiting fellow at the George Washington University. So a very important topic that we'll be talking about today. Volodymyr, welcome to...
Okay, so it's glad to be here. And like was said, I've been in this room many times, and also I talked over there in 1201. Normally, what I talk about, including here, is language issues, language policies, language beliefs and practices in Ukraine of the general population. Usually, it's based on surveys and focus group discussions. Interviews, whatever, the public discourse, but it's a general population. This time around, it will be 2 categories of the population. Why do I talk about these 2 groups, IDPs and refugees? Because you know a bit, including for my own work, about language changes in Ukraine after the full-scale invasion. So what I call, and some other scholars call, language shift. Yeah. So a shift in practices and attitudes away from Russian and towards Ukrainian. So the abandonment, full or partial, of Russian in many practices, particularly in public communication, and an embrace of Ukrainian as the main language of public communication, but for many also private communication. So in addition to speaking Russian themselves, people also more strongly support the use of Ukrainian in society in general and its promotion by the state. Yeah, so changes in language situation and language policy. So, at the same time, 2 categories of population, the language practices and attitudes are underestablished. These are IDPs and refugees. They are not the same as everybody, because they found themselves in different contexts from the rest of the population, and remarkably from each other. Yeah, so they differ in what they experience around them and how they change in response to those experiences. So let me give you some numbers first. These are some of the numbers I found on the internet. These are by no means mine, and they're changing. Sometimes there are two different estimates, roughly for the same time. But just to give you a very rough idea, so it's several millions of IDPs and probably even more of refugees. Largest numbers of IDPs in Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv Oblast, and the city of Kyiv, contrary to what many think it's not the west of Ukraine, even though, of course, many found themselves in the west of Ukraine. And when asked now, with this time horizon they have in mind, most of them say they intend to stay, and only 15% say they intend to return. Maybe more in some surveys. In refugees, the largest numbers are in Germany and Poland, and then smaller numbers in Czechia, the UK, Spain, and other countries. Some are also in North America and some even further, maybe in Australia. So of these, only minorities say they intend to stay, but there are suspicions that many more actually want to stay, but do not find it comfortable to declare that. At the same time, many of them have already returned. Both IDPs and refugees. One of the most cited reasons for that is lack of funds, lack of housing, lack of funds to rent housing or buy housing, especially among IDPs, which I now mentioned. They are less affluent, so on average they are poorer than refugees, and thus find it more difficult to say where they are. IDPs are rather evenly divided by gender, a bit more female, just over half of the working nation, and there are a quarter of children and 1/5 of seniors. In general, they have a low well-being standards. 39% reported needing even food, 25% clothes, and so on. Refugees, in contrast, are mostly women, even though a quarter are adult men, and there are, of course, children. 3/4 are people with higher education. So these are people who found it possible to move abroad and possible to stay abroad for a couple of years already. They have higher well-being standards than general population. 11% report they could buy anything, and usually people underestimate like anything they want. And only 4% say they didn't have enough even for food. So less than among general population. They have different environments and challenges as far as language is concerned. Most IDPs move to less racified regions and localities than their own. Yeah, so many of them are from the Donbass, from big cities like Kharkiv or Zaporizhia, and smaller cities in those regions. And many of them found themselves in the center of Ukraine, or even in the east, like the city of Dnipro, for example, in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. But many went to the west or the countryside, and there they found themselves in mostly Ukrainian-speaking environment, which of course affects how they behave and eventually what they think. Instead, most refugees went to localities with no Ukrainian around, except for themselves and some other refugees. In addition to no Ukrainian, or very little Ukrainian, there are some opportunities, and there is some actually pressure to use Russian in some practices. For example, when the authorities provide Russian interpreters, but no Ukrainian interpreters, or when some clerks in the authorities know some Russian themselves, or some employers, but no Ukrainian. And Of course, many people are happy to speak Russian because it's their first language. But even those who aren't happy, who would not want to be similar to Russians, and one of the main reasons people avoid speaking Russian abroad, they find it impossible to rely on any other language. They don't know the host language. They know little English, and they cannot use Ukrainian. So Russian is kind of a pressure choice. And for them, the main challenge is to learn the host language. Yeah, and in some cases improve their English, because English can provide some communication. I mean, we'll see how it's different in Germany from Poland, but Ukrainian is not a priority for them. In contrast to the IDPs, those who found themselves in the Ukrainian speaking localities, especially, but also as long as they stay in Ukraine, they are part of Ukrainian society who is under pressure to abandon Russian and embrace Ukrainian. So there is no such pressure among refugees. And so now we'll see at my data and how data speaks about that. So I relied here on 2 online focus groups conducted by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, one of the most reputed Ukrainian poll companies, which I've been working with for 14 years now. This is a part of my work in the project called Ukrainian History Global Initiative, led by Timothy Snyder. So I'm supposed to write a chapter for them, and they were kind enough to pay for this focus group discussion and a survey. Unfortunately, I cannot use survey data for that, because survey did not include the population currently residing abroad. So no surveys in Ukraine cover that because of the problem of access. They rely on mobile numbers and mobile phone numbers, and most people, even if they keep Ukrainian phone numbers, they do not pick up calls from unknown numbers. I have 2 online focus groups, each participant in each group, age 25 to 50 years, rather even gender balance. That was my request. For the IDP group, we have 2 people in Lviv Oblast, 2 in Cherkasy, 2 in Dnipro Oblast, and 1 in the cities of Chernivtsi and 1 in Uzhhorod. And refugee group, rather than kind of spreading them across Europe, I decided to focus on Poland and Germany, and I have 5 people in Poland and 3 in Germany. So that's the data I've been using. So let me first discuss the language used in the groups themselves. So moderators were instructed to consistently speak Ukrainian without switching to Russian, and encouraging the respondents to use Ukrainian, but of course allowing the use of Russian for those who find it difficult all of the time or some of the time. And I've been doing this for 10 years, and I observed change. In 2015, the first time I did it, even in Chernivtsi, not everybody spoke Ukrainian. In Kharkiv, virtually nobody did. Some started, and then they, as the conversation progressed, they switched to the custom Russian. And even if being vehemently pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian, because it was after the 2014 aggression, and over the years it changed. Now. In addition to these 2 groups, I had two groups with the general population, one in Odessa, one in Chernihiv. All of these groups are online. Yeah, so that allows to talk simultaneously to people who are scattered. Yeah, in different localities. Even those who were with the general population in Odessa and Chernihiv are online. Yeah, so but what I'm saying is now most participants consistently spoke Ukrainian. Some with mixtures of Russian, but nobody refused to speak Ukrainian from the beginning. And nobody like switched fully in the middle of the discussion. Two participants in the refugee group spoke more Russian than Ukrainian, but from time to time reverted to Ukrainian, kind of signals their willingness and ability. Especially when the language is discussed, it kind of matters to them to demonstrate that they are fluent in Ukrainian. Of course, they love Ukrainian and so on and so forth. It just happens that they are more comfortable with Russian. Yeah, so kind of a usual excuse, but he used much less than before. Yeah, and the rest of participants were tolerant to those who used some Russian, so there was no hostile reaction. Okay, so if there was a mild pressure from the moderators to use Ukrainian, it wasn't. Of course, it affected their own practice, but it wasn't like a strong pressure that they were intimidated, like bullied or whatever. So now let me move to their reported language used in other practices. So in everyday life in general. Yeah. So when the moderators ask them what language they use and ask them to kind of, it's an open-ended question rather than yes no. Tell us in some detail what languages you use well. Like in the family, at work, with friends, in your locality, in public communication, in the consumption of the media, and so on. So try to be specific, and then if a respondent was not specific enough, the moderator kind of urged them to clarify some points. So we have a rather detailed picture. And of course, I'm reporting only the main features. Yeah. So the main dividing line is between public and private communication. So this is something I observed after 2022. Remarkably, it was not a main divide before 22. So most people spoke in either that language or that language, both in public and private communication, which means Ukraine was tolerant enough to Russian, so there was no pressure. Nobody felt afraid. Nobody felt really obliged. I mean, there were some workplaces where there were some policies, but more often than not, those policies encourage them to speak Russian than Ukrainian. Notwithstanding the official status of exclusive official status of Ukrainian. So now people are more inclined to speak Ukrainian in public communication, and at the same time, many keep Russian in private. And they explain it kind of. We don't want to lose or offend or upset these people we love. Yeah. So if my mother speaks Russian, if my old and dear friends speak Russian, and so I don't want to kind of alienate them. Yeah. Upset them. So that's the reason most commonly given for that. And some also mentioned that they speak Russian with their fellows IDPs if they find themselves, for example, in Western Ukraine. The locals speak Ukrainian, but other IDPs speak Russian, so they speak Russian among themselves. Only two participants mentioned that they switched in the family. So among these groups, these are kind of minority situations. So the IDPs argue, most of them, that they speak Ukrainian with the authorities and the local population. I mean, if the local population is Ukrainian speaking. I don't know how consistently they speak, really speak, not just fill in for some forms. With the authorities, if you are in Dnipro, for example, yeah, and some of these employees in the authorities also prefer Russian. So how consistently that is implemented, you need participant observation for that. But there is this pressure in Odessa. Many people refer to this pressure to use Ukrainian in public, defined very broadly, not just the state sector, but also services, yeah, like stores, restaurants, bus drivers. some people provided particular reasons, like one woman living in a village in Vilna said it's impossible to speak Russian in a village. Yeah, I mean, probably she meant in a village in the West. Yeah, maybe, and if the village in the Donbass, it is possible, but she just referred to this being a village. Women in Uzhhorod say, I communicate in Ukrainian state establishment and when it's required of me. And of course, what is required is her own perception, yeah, her own feeling, where it is required and where not. But the point is, she doesn't go beyond that. Yeah, so when she believes it's not required, so Russian is fine. In contrast, one woman in Cherkasy Oblast says, this is my inner decision. And to defend our language even, however I can. And so when a person frames it like that, that means, of course, that she or he, also uses this language in private communication. So everywhere you can, yeah. But when it's required, of course, it's not required in private use, except for some situations I will mention in a minute. It might happen that even in private communications there is a pressure. And asked specifically about the media consumption, most people said they use both languages, depending on the availability. Yeah, so of course, availability is a kind of a tricky thing. It's also an excuse in the final analysis, because if you dig deeper, or if you are not so picky in terms of what exactly you want to consume, you can find enough stuff in Ukrainian. And of course, for many people, English is also an option, and there is a lot in English. But for some, the unavailability or inaccessibility of something they want in Ukrainian is a reason enough to rely on Russian. Yeah, and so this is kind of understandable. And if you ask more questions, you will find it out. Refugees. One person formulated the main principle, and a couple of others agreed with her. It depends on who is standing in front of you, yeah? Who we are talking about, who we are communicating with. Is a fellow refugee, or is it a local, or it's an employee in some of a governmental agency, or it's an employer, or whoever. Again, depending on whether it's Ukrainian or a person from the former USSR, or a person from the host country. So all is different. And most of them are flexible. Only two participants say they never speak Russian. So it's either Ukrainian or the local language. And some also admit it's using English, but of course it depends on your proficiency. Little change in private life only. Couple of people said they switched. But normally they continue what they were doing. In contrast to those who say they only speak with elderly parents or friends for many decades or something, some continuing with their children, who of course are more flexible and could have switched to Ukrainian much more easily. But parents often believe that there is no need for them, because the main task for the children is to learn the host language, and they help them, they encourage them. Refugees themselves use host language if they know it, or English. In state establishments, shops with local populations. There is a marked difference between Germany and Poland. In Germany, much more English, because the authorities and population is much more proficient. I will show you one of the next slides. Some use the local language in public consistently. Like one person said, even with a child, when we are in the street or in a shop, we only speak Polish. Others, when it is required explicitly of them, like addressing an employee or a shop owner who doesn't understand any other language, yes, but other than no. Some says we use this phone interpreters, you know, so we don't even have to bother. One person said that it's environment and necessity, and different people emphasize different parts of these two. Some even say necessity is more important, regardless of the environment. If I don't feel like I have to, I won't do that. A number of participants said they admitted to using Russian in communication with people from the former Soviet Union. Many of them even have no problem communicating with Russians, because they believe that if these Russians have left their country, they do not support the war, which is of course naive or hypocritical. I don't know which, but that's the excuse they cite for speaking Russian and for speaking in general with these people who represent the country, which is kind of predominantly perceived in Ukraine as the enemy country. Another question pertained to their perceptions of languages. What is the Ukrainian language for you? What is the Russian language for you? Yeah, and so we see a lot of differences, kind of on the flanks, but in the middle there is some similarity. So if you are free, then of course Ukrainian is your language. It's kind of as an identity language, as a national language, and then Russian is the enemy language. Yeah, and if you are framing it in terms of communication, then this is a language you can use in some situations. This is a language you can use in other situations. So it is different, but. Many people add some nuances, like my native language, which I was deprived of in the Soviet time. So now I'm kind of reverting to it. Yeah, I'm now returning what is mine by right. Yeah, but what is stolen from me, taken from me. Counteraction to what Russia is doing. Yeah, and some more pragmatically referred is a language spoken in the state where I live. Yeah, so it's just. Something which is external to me, I'm respecting that, I'm taking that into account, but it is inside of me. Russian, for some, is plainly the enemy language, but sometimes they have to use it. Another person who is living near Lviv in his side, it was a town of Pustometi, very close to Lviv. And he's from Kharkiv, and he's occasionally returning to Kharkiv. And he said, when I'm living in this town or traveling to Lviv, of course it's the enemy language. But when I'm returning to Kharkiv, it's the language of my people. Yeah, you know, I don't hate them. I don't choose them. So I am with them. I'm one of them. So it is also a demonstration of how context-specific these perceptions are. One person refers to Russian as a language of the past, but not something which is abandoned. Kind of finally, I've gotten rid of that. Yeah, no, it is a language of what is left. Yeah, so I want something left of my past. You know, not just completely lost. So this is kind of my link to that past, my kind of ability to retrieve that past. Ordinary people, ordinary language used by a certain category of population whom I do not perceive as enemies. So it's part of my competitors, and that's their choice, that's their right, and I respect that. I do not alienate them based on language. So a lot of flexibility and a lot of context specificity. Yeah, among refugees. Standard presentation is Ukrainian as the language of my country, and Russian is my native language. Yeah, so both are important, but one is kind of externally, and another one, the other one internally. Ukrainian is my language of parents, my ancestors. Russian is another language I know, and I'm glad I do. Now I also know German. And then this person added, so we did not erase German after the Second World War. After we fought with the Nazis. She of course forgot to mention that German was not widespread in Ukraine. There was no need to eradicate it, to kind of expel it. In contrast to Russian, but that's a rationale. So that's kind of a reason they provide for being kind of soft on Russian and understanding Russian speakers. One says, in effect, I have two native languages. This same kind of dichotomy of internal and external is presented in terms of native languages. It might seem absurd to say about the native language of a country, but on the other hand, that's how people adopt common long-term notion to something different to accommodate the changing situation. So native language is something important and something dear. But it's not something which I have fully embraced yet. Or maybe I'm not going to fully embrace it anytime soon. But this is the native language of the country. So I have another native language of my environment, or my inner circle, or my communication. Just what is Russian to me? No more than a language. So similar to German, similar to English, similar to, for some, even similar to Ukrainian. They can say both are just languages. But some say no, Ukrainian is just a special language, and Russian is just a language, which is kind of an accomplishment. It's a movement away from Russian, which is delegated to the level of just a language. Another question I asked was about how these adults observe or kind of conceptualize the communication of their own children and other children they communicate with or observe frequently. So the reason for this question was because there is a lot of talk in Ukrainian public discourse, including on social media, how children are much more Russified in today's Ukraine than adults. I observed that a lot in Kyiv as well. So in public, like I said, many more people among adults switch to Ukrainian, but among children, what I hear in public, but among themselves, kind of public-private, so publicly exposed private communication. Mostly, I would say, overwhelmingly, at least in my neighborhood, in Russia, and many people report that on social media, and of course, regret, lament, and in the Odessa group, most people perceive it kind of normal. They're normal people. They do not go beyond what is required of them. Adults behave like that too. So children also switch to Ukrainian at schools, but of course speak Russian among themselves. So what is reported among IDPs? My children communicate in Ukrainian, so this woman in Lviv Oblast, in a village, when playing and in school, except when they are watching TikTok, which is Russian speaking. Of course, TikTok is not predominantly Russian speaking. Of course, there is a lot of stuff in Chinese and English and other languages, and in Ukrainian. But of course, they don't know those other languages, and there is more in Russian than in Ukrainian. So they have no qualms using that Russian language stuff, and then their mother regrets that they are using Russian. But of course, she doesn't forbid, doesn't help them to find Ukrainian language stuff, or maybe she does, but no, I didn't mention that. My two children speak Russian with me, but the oldest has a Galician girlfriend, and that's kind of private pressure I alluded to earlier. So and they speak only Ukrainian. So if you have someone special, someone who matters to you. It can be a girlfriend. It can be just friend. It can be your teacher or I don't know, coach, whoever who encourages you strongly, who you look up to. And then you can switch even in private communication. And another person in Uzbek mentioned that with locals they speak mixed languages, Suzik, so they mix their Russian with the locals Ukrainian, so nobody fully switches to the other language. But yeah, among themselves they continue speaking Russian. So even among IDPs, even those who look, the three quotes from people who are now in the Western Ukraine, but they mentioned that the children did not fully abandon Russia. No, I mean, are not going to. Among refugees, it's much worse if you continue consider Russian worse. So this person who is from Kharkiv and living in Germany, in Hamburg, who is originally a Ukrainian speaker, but then switched to Russian in Kharkiv and made a family, raised children in Russian. Now he said, my children and I communicate in Russian, I didn't switch to Ukrainian with them. I do not demand that because they have it hard as it is. In так важко. They are learning Russian and all the environment, they are learning German and their all environment is German. So German is a priority, yeah, of course, and Ukrainian is not. And even though I speak Ukrainian with many of my friends, with my parents, but I do not pressure the children. We have some lessons of Ukrainian, so they are fluent in Ukrainian, but no practice in it. And this person says that in the street, I would shop in Polish even with me. She speaks with peers in Polish, but if they're Ukrainian, then in Ukrainian. We speak Ukrainian as a family and with my parents. He knows Russian too, just knows Russian, but doesn't use it. He found English much more relevant. Before he learned German. He was able to rely on English, and that helped. So that's a role of English abroad, which is kind of an interest phenomenon, which now many refugees learn for the first time. Language use in host localities. So not just how IDPs or refugees speak to the locals, but how they observe the local communication in general. I'm in a village where they speak Ukrainian, so kind of normally, it's always central Ukraine and not the west. In Chernivtsi, everybody communicates mostly Ukrainian. In the special house for IDPs, most people communicate in Russian. In Dnipro, it's mixed speech, state establishments, hospitals, shops, only Ukrainian. In the streets, some people speak Ukrainian, others Russian. There is no pressure, of course. An ideal picture, not sure how exactly kind of smooth and free of pressure it is. In Odessa, many people reported pressure, even bullying on the part of Ukrainian speakers. Again, probably kind of a strategy to denounce this pressure and defend their right to continue using Russian. Refugees. These are just two different pictures, two glimpses. Warsaw and Hamburg. The main difference is that a person in Poland says that Poles are prouder will never allow themselves to switch to a language. So everybody has to switch to their language. Yeah. In contrast, this person in Hamburg, the same who doesn't want to pressure his children. So he admits that he doesn't much need German. He works online, remotely in English. And he's able to rely on English everywhere. Yeah, so most Germans, almost all Germans know English, and if you need help in a shop, they easily switch to English. Yeah, and an admission you can unfortunately hear Russian more often than Ukrainian because there are many immigrants from the post-Soviet countries. So of course he doesn't have a problem speaking Russian to them. Finally, I ask about instances of reversion to Russian, whether they have experienced something like that themselves, and whether they know about such cases. Because again, there is a lot of talk on social media how initial shift toward Ukraine, how initial patriotically driven embrace of Ukraine and abandonment of Russian is now reversed, or at least halted. And so whether and where this might happen, yeah. So people used to switch to Ukrainian, now they're reverting to Russian. Different reasons, but mostly when people believe it is no longer needed, and where it might be, those who have returned to their localities in the east and south, they have reverted to the Russian language. For example, our Kharkiv, I know this for sure, yeah, and those who are here, they in contrast try to speak Ukrainian. So as long as you are in the West, you try to speak Ukrainian. If you decide to go back, you find yourself in a largely Ukrainian, Russian-speaking environment, and you see no reason to continue making effort and kind of contrasting with even antagonizing maybe some of your acquaintances, yeah. This person, these two other persons mentioned people who moved abroad. She used to live in Lviv, moved from the east to Lviv and then to Germany. Now learns German and writes to me in Russian. She says there is no need to learn Ukrainian abroad. So very pragmatic confession. I mean, and it is easier for respondents to speak about somebody else, yeah. So and present their reasons as purely pragmatic. There is no need, because if you are talking about yourself, you would still believe it's better to abandon your national language, your native language. So in a way, that's a kind of additional. It wasn't my intention to make it easier for them to converse, but I asked whether they themselves or they know about somebody else, and it happens so that everybody spoke about somebody else rather than themselves. This person in the last quote, she doesn't even know if she stays in Poland for good, but admitting such a possibility, she says, "Why should I make an effort?" Yeah. Refugees communication with people from former Soviet Union. If a person left Russia and lives in Poland, if you here too, then you must live here and survive, and there is neither time or desire for conflict. Yeah, thank you. So of course, they present it as somehow different from the situation in Ukraine. In Ukraine, you even more kind of value the need to survive, and the kind of more reluctant to conflict with somebody. But these people present the refugee situation as somehow unique, explaining why it is inappropriate and unnecessary to argue with anybody, and which is kind of an excuse for them to just speak Russian with these people, like have no qualms about using the language which is perceived as the enemy language by many in Ukraine, but obviously not there. And only one person say, "I have a principle. If I live in Poland now and a person addresses me in Russian, I will never switch to Russian with them." But that's a clear minority. Language-based conflicts. IDPs sometimes mention being denied service in service establishments when they mistakenly address them in Russian, then kind of come to their senses and speak Ukrainian, and they have that service. And another person said it's mostly on social media. And as I said, it happens more than Ukrainian territory. It's the same strategy. We are in a different position. We don't have time for arguments for conflicts in abroad. Changes to self-perception. Some people identify this is a general self-perception. I specifically emphasize that it is not just about language, about your self-perception in general. And one person mentioned what happened is we want to switch to Ukrainian, speak Ukrainian. Yeah, but other people emphasize the war or migration, bringing people closer to one another. Yeah. So the second quote is a person says that Russian aggression urged people to be more open and sympathetic. And as a third quote, a person in Poland said, I noticed that here Ukrainian people treat one another better than in Ukraine, because here, you know, not just a person to them, but also a competitor, as if it were not the case in Ukraine. Conclusion. So I believe I provided ample illustrations that different contexts cause different trajectories of the two displaced categories of the Ukrainian population. Refugees, IDPs, they live in Ukraine, not in the same parts of Ukraine where they had lived before, but live in Ukraine and undergo the same change as all Ukrainians. All this boost of patriotism, but also the pressure and also the legislation in favor of Ukrainians. So all these factors excuse me, move them closer to Ukrainian. Many, in addition to that, live in mostly Ukrainian-speaking localities and must accommodate the local population preferences. And some refer that if you mistakenly addressed even in a shop where you are a valued customer, supposedly, yeah, but probably not valued enough to be accommodated to. Refugees said that they and their children primarily must learn the host country language, and neither they nor their children feel the pressure or need to learn Ukrainian. Like I said, it's not that easy to admit that about yourself, but they find ways to convey that message, speaking about other people or even their own children. And they need Russian for communication with people from former Soviet Union, and most of them do not have this problem. Like if it's just a language, then if it's the most convenient language, so I have no problem using it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we have lots of questions. I'll start with my question while people are thinking of theirs. So yeah, for this one question about the refugees, it was interesting to see how the need Russian for communication with people from FSU, and I guess my question is a two-part question about the diaspora communities. Yes, so we know a lot of the communities outside Ukraine or FSU, a lot of people are from Ukraine. A lot of people are descended of these communities, Russian speaking, but not always. So basically, the people that left Ukraine a long time ago and settled in New York or other places, Germany, they basically, it seems like they did not experience any even mild Ukrainization because they've been outside of Ukraine that Ukrainians did over the last several decades, right? That's very interesting that kind of remains more conservative. But question, there are refugees that come into contact with Ukrainian-speaking diaspora communities. Did you encounter any of that? Somebody that was, say, predominantly Russian-speaking that in Germany or in Poland came in contact with the Ukrainian diaspora, and was there any effect on Ukrainization in those encounters?
Thank you. No, nobody reported that, and nobody framed this situation in either Germany and Poland in terms of old Ukrainians versus new Ukrainians. Yeah. In Germany, I believe the main reason is that old Ukrainians are few. And it's not like in Canada, or the US, where these new waves kind of flew into all the channels, and into all the institutions and benefited financially and so on. So probably it was very different in Germany, and for them, these old Ukrainians were replaced by former Soviet Union. So many people I encounter myself here. They just mentioned that they interact with people from the former Soviet Union, but they didn't clarify in what capacity. Yeah, so some was like neighbors, some mentioned just friends. Yeah. So such nice people from Moscow. We are just friends with them, yeah. what I encountered myself during my recent travels is that for some Ukrainians who moved to Germany after 22, people from the former Soviet Union are the most likely first employers.
Mhm.
Because before they learn the host country language, they can rely on Russian. And people who've been to Germany for many years, they still speak Russian, and they are willing to employ Russian-speaking Ukrainians in some capacity which doesn't require the like cleaners in their hotel. I found that in June in Berchtesgaden in Bavaria, yeah, for example. So this boy from Kherson talked to me how most people in these hotels are Ukrainian, yeah, all cleaners and some even do, some in reception. He's still learning German, so he's coping with German and English. But he was hired because his employer was from Russia. Now she allegedly perceived herself as German, but happens to speak Russian and hire people speaking Russian. Yeah. So in Poland, it might be different. There were many Ukrainians before that.
Closer to here.
Yeah. But they did not specify this how post-22 refugees benefit or contact with all the people and all the structures. So I don't know about that, unfortunately.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a comprehensive research. I'm not sure if my question is related specifically to the phenomena you discussed, but I generally, I'm Ukrainian, so I also take a lot of classes related to Ukraine here, and we discussed in some classes and we had some readings that the phenomenon in Ukraine, it's like a Soviet legacy, as we said, that for Ukrainians, the language and identity is not equal. So like in the majority of the world, for people that like I speak English, it's kind of say something about me. For Ukrainians, it was like the person could be very much pro-Ukrainian, but not considering like Russian language as something not related to the Ukrainian identity, let's say. And I can say from my experience, like I'm from Ukrainian speaking family, I grew up in Kyiv, and I like freely spoke Ukrainian and Russian at school, and I didn't even pay attention to that, even though I had like very much pro-Ukrainian position like for my entire life. And it switched me in 2000, like since 2014, but still not that much. It was like closer to 2020 when I thought like, okay, why do I speak Russian with my friends? Like I'm Ukrainian speaking, I live in Ukraine, in Kyiv. So then I decided to switch like finally to Ukrainian. So my question is, do you think that like since Putin made equal Russian language and Russians, so like we are coming to kind of save like Russian speaking people. So like, do you think it changed anyhow, like this perception that Russian language can say something about you? And like, if you don't equalize yourself with Russian people, you have to like learn Ukrainian language or at least use it like on the streets? Or is it like still the case that like for Ukrainians, even though like the majority of people, let's say in Kharkiv, they hate Russia because they're bombed daily, they can't be defended, but they continue speaking Russian. Do you think it's okay?
Thank you. It is complicated. So you're asking for a simple answer, and there is none. So first, it is not true that for all Ukrainians, or even for most Ukrainians, language and identity were not related until 22 or even 2014. So my research shows over the years that many people felt they're closely related, and even if they did not switch to Ukrainian, they try to learn Ukrainian, and many proudly say, I'm fluent in Ukrainian. Yeah, so I just happen to speak Russian. And they believe that Ukrainian is their native language. And there was a persistent gap between identification with Ukrainian as one's native language and the predominant use of Ukrainian in everyday life, which is kind of the legacy I show in one chapter. It's the legacy of the Soviet policies and discourses, but it persisted in independent Ukraine, which promoted this identification much more than the youth. Second, it did start to change in 2014, but paradoxically, 2014 spurred identification with Ukrainian more than the use of Ukrainian originally. Then kind of the youth started catching up with the identity, especially after 2019 language law. And there were a lot of changes in policies, like language quotas on television and radio, increased language use in education, and finally this comprehensive language law of 2019, and its provision in particular on the language use in services. Yeah, so it changed drastically the public language use, at least in Kyiv, and to some extent in other big cities. I mean, even in Kharkiv with Dnipro or Odessa, not as much as in Kyiv, but in Kyiv it really changed. Newspaper kiosk until 2021 were dominated by the press in Russian. Bookstores were dominated by books in Russian. That all changed even before full-scale war, because of the policies with people supported because they identified with Ukrainian. And finally, after 2022, language started catching up with identity even more. People believed that they are Ukrainian, not just kind of theoretically Ukrainian, but practically Ukrainian. They started speaking Ukrainian to prove Putin wrong. However, not all of them. There are still some people who argue, yes, I'm Ukrainian, but Russian is my native language, and I'm more intimate, I'm more confident, this is the language which is dear to me. Of course I know Ukrainian, of course I support Ukraine, and all these mantras, which can be true or not, it's a different story. But the point is they present that as a kind of justification why they have the right to keep Russian. I'm patriotic enough, I'm Ukrainian enough, and leave me alone. Yeah.
Thank you. Anastasia? Yes.
That is very interesting, especially in my class, read a lot by you. Thank you so much. I have two questions. The first one is, based on what you're describing, it looks like that is something that David Leiden saw in his identity information book, and he called it accommodating practices. You speak to me, I speak to you, and we share the language this way. And so here, just like in the 90s that David Leiden is writing about, that has happened on the territory of Ukraine. And then back in the 90s, there were diaspora Ukrainians, right? So they wouldn't participate in accommodating practices, mostly because they couldn't, but also they kind of made this big deal out of Ukrainian will die in Ukraine, so we need to maintain Ukrainian in wherever we are. And some were true Ukrainians, some were not true Ukrainians, right? Depending on how you interpret it. This is the exact same thing that I see here, it's just in reverse. Now, the belief is that Ukrainian will be fine in Ukraine, so we don't need to worry about the survival. So, do you predict basically the development of these two groups of Ukrainians, like refugee Ukrainians, and then Ukrainians, if you wish, and with the same dichotomy between them as diaspora Ukrainians versus Ukrainians? It's just like, it's almost like the history repeats itself. So that's question number one. And the second one is very straightforward. Do you think the responses were influenced by a pro-social versus anti-social personality type of the people you were talking? Yeah, like if I'm pro-social, I'm gonna switch it.
Sorry. Second question. I didn't think about that, and frankly, I don't know. Of course, I believe these personality types are too important not to affect this. But I'm not ready to give you an answer. As for this first one, I mean, until recently, to me, Latin, even though he was my host at Stanford back in 2005, when I started working on language matters, and he our talks with him and his book affected my thinking. I was happy to meet both him and Joshua Fishman, late Joshua Fishman, there, and so the two different ways of studying Ukrainian language situation. And so I was enriched and kind of encouraged by both of them. But having said that, Leighton's book exemplified kind of the wrong application of right theories to me. So David is such a brilliant person. His analysis is so comprehensive. He used a whole range of methods. And actually what he predicted is that that language, Russian, will be the basis of a new identity in Ukraine. So all Russian speakers, both ethnically Russian and Ukrainian and other minorities, will form this new identity based on their language. What happened was exactly the opposite. They all decided to be Ukrainian rather than Russian, and as I show in my Slavic review piece in 2022, actually. The Russian identity all but disappeared in Ukraine. Yeah, so Russian-speaking Ukrainian, even without losing Russian as their main language, decided to be Ukrainian. And the state policies and discourses, of course, facilitated that, but it also it was a decision. In terms of this dichotomy you are talking about, I mean, yes, some people in diaspora wanted to fight for Ukrainian precisely because it was not fought for enough in Ukraine. But there were a lot of battles among people in diaspora as well. So Alena Dashkitska, for example, presents a lot of research on that. Even before 22, how new ways of Ukrainian fight for their right to participate in this community without losing their language. Yeah, even by relying on that language as one of the legitimate languages of these communities. I mean, one of the three languages, yeah, both Ukrainian, Russian, and English. And so that was not visible in Europe, probably because there were no clear distinct ways. It was clear in North America where Allah is working. But now nobody said that we don't need to keep Ukrainian here because it will be kept in Ukraine. They do not want to say we are distinct from people in Ukraine. They just present we happen to be living in a distinct environment. Yeah, maybe we'll return. Maybe our children will return. So nobody says fully we will never return. We've abandoned that Ukraine for good, and that's no longer our country, and so on. So nobody is unpatriotic to such an extent. Yeah, quote unquote. So they don't say that, but maybe they are driven by that. They informed by that perceived distinctions. And I didn't dig deep enough into that, but it's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Volodymyr on the topic?
Yuko.
I wonder, Volodymyr, I don't know if this came up in your research in gathering this data, but was there any if there even was a choice, but for perhaps it wasn't a choice, but for IDPs, did you see anywhere where people would choose to go to a certain region because of linguistic? Like if you were Russian speaking, you didn't want to go maybe to Western Ukraine, you wanted to go to more Russian speaking. Did you encounter that at all? Like, oh, I didn't want to end up in, you know what I mean? Is that a factor in people? If that's a
interesting thing, I didn't ask, and nobody admitted to spontaneously kind of volunteer that answer. I believe it might have happened, but not frequently. People were moving where they had somebody. Of course, that might mean that they had somebody speaking their own language, that more likely. But of course, many people were moved by somebody, like in an organized fashion, and they were moved where they were capacity to accommodate them. And also many people wanted to move probably as far as possible to be safer, But on the other hand, there is some research indicating that very many people didn't want to move even beyond their own oblast, because they wanted to be kind of safer, but not too far away because they expected to return. And so that is confirmed by this data, like Harriman and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast are two kind of with the most refugees, and the city of Kyiv, because it's a big magnet, and there is a lot of housing there and there are a lot of jobs there, But I don't think that was a factor, except when you move to your relatives. That of course, or your friends. So these networks, of course, were kind of also linguistically differentiated. Most people would have friends and relatives speaking the same language as themselves. No. With friends, not always, but in many cases.
Yeah, Poland's an interesting example too, because I know that in the recent 2-3 years, there've been, like, for a lot of the children that have moved there from Ukraine, there's like children's book as an industry is developing for these children. These are stories in Ukrainian for children about moving and about identity and about encountering different languages. Like it's a thing. There are authors that publish these things. So it's I think Poland's a very interesting.
So the Ukrainian authors published in Ukraine for Poland
for new refugee kids. Yeah. And also maybe it's very anecdotal, but I spent last summer, 2 summers ago, 2 weeks in Wrocław, and just in the main the square. Like I very often heard the singers, the buskers, singing Ukrainian songs. I wonder if these were, that's a whole other thing. Like, but you're singing Iwasiuk songs as almost as often as I heard Polish songs or English language songs, or you heard Okianeri's songs or things like that. It's a very interesting kind of niche.
I heard about, read on Facebook about somebody reporting. I don't remember. Somebody in Western Europe that people, singers of non-Ukrainian origin, having nothing to do with Ukraine, learn some Ukrainian songs because they believe that much of their audience is Ukrainian, or likes Ukrainian enough, so they will appreciate it. So Ukrainian becomes one of these global languages for mass culture.
I thought about that. I think that may have been the case there, but that's also interesting because you're walking around Wrocław and you hear Russian on the streets, and you're like, okay, and then you hear Ukrainian, and then somebody singing, so it's a really weird existence of.
I've never been to Wrocław, but in Krakow, where I normally transfer from the train to the plane, I hear so much Russian and much more Russian than Ukrainian. And it's of course very, very distressing because you don't know whether you should hug them or hate them, I mean, this is a common reason everybody says about that, but it is still the need to draw the line. And I mean, of course, I never attack a stranger because I'm not strong enough. So, but what I'm saying is there is a lot more Russian spoken in Krakow. When you exit the train, when you're on the train from Kyiv to Przemysl, and when you exit the train on this line to the customs, you hear much more Ukrainian than Russian. Much more. But when you're in the streets of Krakow, so they are regrouped, they are not with the Ukrainian crowd, they are with the refugee crowd, or maybe some of them are also Russian, but I believe most of them are Ukrainian.
Interesting. Yes.
I'm former director of the United Nations. My question, do you have any statistics about the price of the feeling of foreign students to study Ukrainian? And is there any conclusion between the tendency of studying abroad in Europe and some other parts of the world and Russian? What is increasing, what is decreasing? Do you have any idea?
Thank you. I don't have my own data, and I don't study that. I read some data about the rise of people learning Ukrainian in various ways, including on Duolingo. The demand for Duolingo in Ukrainian rose spectacularly. Although you never know whether they were foreigners or Russian-speaking Ukrainians, who maybe some of them were Russian-speaking Ukrainians, but of course, many more people wanted to learn at least some Ukrainian after 2022. I don't know the later dynamics, whether this is still increasing, whether it is stable now, whether it is decreasing. So I don't know. But at that time, when I read about it, there was a kind of an indication that the demand for Russian is declining. Maybe some of those people who used to want to learn Russian then wanted to, at least for some time, to learn Ukrainian, but I don't know what happened. Having said that, this popular demand in various platforms and so on did not much translate into university dynamics. Because the university programs are much more inertial, which kind of annoys me very much, and many Ukrainian scholars and Ukrainian studies scholars are unhappy about that. But as Marco can testify to this university, I mean, Russian language studies and culture and literature and history is a kind of a huge machine, which is very inertial, which fights for its persistence and survival, and which doesn't allow Ukrainian studies to take over. There is an expansion of Ukrainian studies, including Ukrainian language courses across the US, for example. But the Russian language is in a different league altogether.
Thank you. Okay, well, after some of our questions, Volodymyr, I want to thank you for your talk. I want to thank everybody for coming for your questions, and we're welcome back anytime to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Пару слайдів, а тоді може, а ти їдеш до готелю після цього чи як? Ні?
Such as hotel.
Ага, добре.